Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Geiger. I have no slides. I am going to be solely entertaining you today. I'm a PhD student at the UC Berkeley School of Information, and I've never actually sort of received a degree in any particular discipline. It's an interdisciplinary space at the Berkeley High School, which has been amazing, where I interact with people from the computer sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. I have a background in my undergraduate. I bounced between computer science, philosophy, political science, anthropology. I have a master's in communication, culture, and technology from Georgetown. I'm trying to, and I try to sort of bring a very transdisciplinary approach to study of software algorithms and agents. And so what I'm going to be talking about you today aren't physical robots in particular, but instead sort of automated agents, algorithms, and a lot of issues around that. However, it's important for me to not see these things as immaterial. And as Greg mentioned, this is a paper that I recently published, focuses on the materiality of algorithms and agents and sort of the things in the world, how they are, everything at their core. You know, there is a mainframe, there is a computer, there is electricity, there is something that is being typed in somewhere. There's data that's flowing in, and that's something that's very important to think about when we talk about ethics in particular. And I'm really glad that I got to follow that great presentation about the sort of citizen science and issues around sort of robotics, because I think it opens up something that's very sort of common to my approach too, is to see ethics not just as a series of prohibitions about what you ought not to do. Ethics is sort of something that's not about sort of preventing you people from doing things that are wrong, but instead something about flourishing, something about what it means to develop software technologies that sort of change the way that we interact within the world. And it's a very important part of my work, and something that I'll be talking to you today in 2 stories I'm going to be telling you, is about sort of the role of algorithms and the role of automated agents in everyday life and what that means. So the first story that I'm going to tell you today, and I'm an ethnographer, so I'm actually sort of obligated to tell you at least one story in that sense. It's a story that's very personal to me. It came actually when I was doing my master's work in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University. This is around 2009. And it was something where at the time I was in a long-term relationship with my girlfriend, who was also in my same program. We'd been together for about 2 years. things seemed to be going well. But things happened, and the relationship ended. And we knew a lot of the same people, and so that was like a very hard sort of decision for us to make. But once we made that decision, we realized that we had another decision that we had to make, because we were both on Facebook. We had to decide when we were going to signify in a database somewhere that we were no longer in a relationship. We already made the decision, but we had to represent it in a computational system. And so we actually thought very long and hard about the fact that whenever we did that, whenever we changed a particular field, Facebook's algorithms would automatically recognize this. They would see, oh, they're not in a relationship anymore, and they would broadcast a status update to all of our friends, to everyone we knew. Not just our friends, our family, if we're sort of friends on Facebook with our family, our coworkers, my advisors, sort of everyone would instantly know that we were no longer in a relationship, and we had to deal with that. But if we didn't, and this is back in 2009, before you could actually stop, before you could actually control a little bit about the information that sort of goes out to your newsfeed, we had to think long and hard about when we wanted to do it. And so we had that conversation as well. And we decided it was going to be on Monday at around 8 p.m. We were going to go to bed and then go back to school the next morning at a time when we both had classes, but different classes. And so we would go, and we planned this out very, very carefully. And then the next day that happened, and nothing was different. Absolutely no one came up to us and said, oh, Stuart, I'm so sorry, I saw on Facebook. We went back home and separately and then said, we were in shock. What happened? It turns out that week we were part of some A/B test in which Facebook's engineers decided that they were going to subject some people to the sort of standard model in which if you break up and you signify that on Facebook, they'll broadcast it to your friends, and other people they won't. We were part of that 50% or that 1% or however many percent who that didn't work, that work wasn't done. And so this raises a very interesting question about delegation, about the roles of algorithms in everyday life, the social activities that we perform, something as intimate and as personal and as social and as human as a romantic relationship, and the way in that's portrayed and demonstrated and performed in a public space. That all of a sudden becomes a question about algorithms, about experimentation, about code, about software, about sort of questions that we don't normally have to deal with in those in those issues. So that's one story that I think is very important to sort of tell when I'm talking about the roles that these sort of automated agents play in everyday life, as we have sort of the increasing algorithmization and the increasing mediation of interaction, such as sort of social media sites as well. And so I think that if we're going to be talking about questions like ethics, questions about politics, questions about responsibility, questions about who gets to delegate something to an algorithm, there's many fascinating issues of public policy, and Deirdre does this amazingly well. There's a lot of interesting work on that sort of stuff from a legal perspective, and I think that work is important, and it's valuable, and it's necessary. But I think that we also need to have an understanding of ethics and an understanding of responsibility that goes into the realm of the everyday. What does it mean to flourish with an algorithm? What does it mean to flourish on Facebook? What does it mean to flourish with a robot? What does it mean to have an understanding of the way that we interact with the world that is supplanted by, that is reinforced by, that is lived alongside with, that is lived by? There's all these different kinds of relations that we can have. And I think that what's very exciting about this work is that we can, in different spaces and in different methods, and different approaches that we have, explore new ways of being human as well as new ways of being social as we explore new ways of being technological. So that's a little rambly at first. So to wrap all that up in that first story, so halfway through in that, is that we need to pay attention whenever we develop these systems to the roles of the average everyday, and that we need to understand that concept of ethics that is not just about it's not just about sort of what people ought not to do, what algorithms ought not to do, what systems ought not to do, what robots ought not to do, but instead sort of what does it mean to do with, to do for, to do by, to think about these things in a more networked or relational perspective as well. So the second thing that I want to talk to you today is sort of more directly on what sort of Greg was referring to, which is the sort of recent work I've been doing on specifically materiality. Now, I'm a developer of algorithmic systems. I've been a part of a number of initiatives. One was there's something that Greg and I were actually a part of called the Turing Test Tournament, in which we had it was a great freshman orientation project in which we had these chatbots, and freshmen would connect to this system, and they would have to determine whether or not they were talking to one of their fellow freshmen or whether or not they were talking to a robot. And one of the interesting things is that there was a number of ethical issues that sort of arise in that. Because as we were developing this chatbot, as we were developing this system that would personify a freshman, asking the typical questions that freshmen would ask, you have to sort of ask, well, we're putting people into this sort of a situation. We're putting freshmen who were just now, and actually they were supposed to log on to the system before they even joined the university as well. It was sort of a getting to know you process, a way that sort of to get them engaged and understand, to get them engaged in the community. One of the great things that I love about that project is precisely what I was talking about this notion of ethics as flourishing. We're sort of asking ourselves a question about not just sort of, well, what does, of course we're asking ourselves this sort of traditional ethical questions about, well, what ought we not to say? What kinds of interactions do we have? Are we going to sort of police the way that freshmen are talking to each other? If they say bad things to each other, what's going to happen? If we have an artificial agent in a mediated space, does that change how? Do we need to what's the ethics around disclosing those issues? But more importantly, the whole system, the whole Turing Test Tournament, was a system that was put in place in order to help freshmen gain a better sense of what it meant to be a freshman. It was a system where they were supposed to come in and talk to each other and interact with each other. And they don't know if they're, of course, interacting with a human or if they're interacting with a chatbot. But either way, that's sort of an interesting question to ask. And it's a way that when they ask, well, what classes are you taking? Where are you from? How long, are you from the Bay Area originally, or did you move here? How do you find living here versus somewhere else? What's your major? Do you know what major you're in yet? These sort of questions, and we found we could actually create these sort of tree diagrams very easily that sort of map the typical freshman conversation that you have with each other. Very predictable. But there's something actually quite interesting about that predictability, too, if we're going to approach this from a notion of sort of ethics as flourishing, ethics as what it means to sort of to have a relationship to a world that is sort of shared with others. As you're negotiating your identity that you have, I'm very interested in the sort of roles that the automated agents can sort of play in that. And sort of what does it mean? So in a certain sense, it doesn't diminish the experience of sort of those conversations that people have about, well, what does it mean to be a freshman at Berkeley? What does it mean to be someone new at Cal? But instead, like the diagrammatic aspect about the fact that we can place this into sort of trees, and then people can push back against that in different ways. That just sort of opens up an interesting question that people can ask about, well, how predictable is this experience? How predictable, in a certain sense, am I alone in this world? Are the things that I'm going through things that are unique to me, or can I draw on others as well? So I realize that I'm sort of rambling a bit on that, but these are sort of questions like the kinds that I think that we need to be asking ourselves when we talk about ethics and robotics. And that's why I'm sort of so excited and so sort of happy to see a lot of the systems that are going in place where we're sort of talking about not just sort of evil robots and how we're sort of supposed to sort of stop the evil robots, which I think is incredibly important to do. An incredibly politically fascinating sort of question, pressing question, especially when it comes to things like the NSA, surveillance. But I think also we need to sort of ask what it means to do good work with automation. And so I want to close with a third project, a project that I've been working on actively right now, and it has to do with Wikipedia, which is a project which I've been a Wikipedia editor since about 2004. I'm very involved in the community. I'm interested in it as an ethnographer of knowledge production, but I'm also interested in it as an individual who uses it quite often, and interested in Wikipedia as a social institution. Now, some of you may or may not know that Wikipedia has a number of problems when it comes to its systemic bias. The fact that most Wikipedians look almost exactly like me in sort of the demographic sort of makeup. It's 83% male, mostly white, mostly European, college educated. It's a particular kind of individual often who contributes to Wikipedia. And there's a number of problematic politics that go on that are sort of reinforced through that. I've done a lot of sort of social scientific research on newcomers in Wikipedia and sort of found that there's a lot of ways that they're treated that are quite hostile, that newcomers have these particular sort of understandings of what they want to do in an encyclopedia, and then they come to Wikipedia and they find they're violating one of the 135 rules that they didn't even know about, and they're pushed out by some veteran who is defending Wikipedia from people who are trying to corrupt it. So this is like a social problem. This is a really important, this is sort of a problem of organizations, a problem of culture, a problem of politics, a problem of ethics. But a project that I've been working on with people at the Wikimedia Foundation has been algorithmic agents and initiatives to try to improve socialization in Wikipedia, to try to help the newcomer experience, try to understand what mistakes newcomers are making and developing automated systems that identify common mistakes and sort of adding helpful tips and tricks and reminders and notifications and sort of things that say, hey, welcome to Wikipedia. We understand that you made this common mistake, and you should just fix this real quick. You shouldn't link to Twitter, for example, because we don't consider Twitter a reliable source. However, if you want to talk about a tweet in an encyclopedic context because you think it's encyclopedic, well, here's how to do that. Here's an essay that someone's written already about that. So the very common mistakes, the way that the sort of very common social media links are actually one of the most common mistakes that sort of good faith contributors have. Another sort of issue, and so another thing that's sort of doing is sort of that project is doing is finding algorithmic ways to link up newcomers who are in trouble, who are sort of getting into issues with interested veteran mentors, people who are trying to find others who really want to help out, who really want to teach other newcomers how to be a Wikipedian, what the rules are, what the norms are, what the practices are, and sort of linking those two people up. So automatically finding someone who's put their name on a list and who's online at the time, and then connecting them with someone who's just made a mistake that needs a human to tell them sort of what's going on. It's sort of a different way of approaching this sort of problem that's been approached as sort of it's keeping humans in the loop. It's not just keeping humans in a loop as sort of part of a feedback mechanism in sort of a cybernetic sense, but instead thinking about what it means to have algorithmic agents as part of a community that's trying to flourish and trying to grow and trying to understand and trying to tackle, as many Wikipedians are, these issues of systemic bias, these issues of the fact that Wikipedians can be very hostile to newcomers. So I want to I'm about at 15 minutes now, and so I just want to sort of conclude by saying that these three stories that I'm telling you are sort of just different ways of understanding ethics beyond the sort of the prohibition of sort of immoral or unethical behavior. It's instead something that I feel like we need to, whether we're talking, in talking about my work on software agents, thinking about what it means to flourish in a society and to algorithmize that work as opposed to algorithmizing punishment. Is something that I would love to see also in sort of physical robotics as well. And so I want to just conclude by saying that I think that a lot of these lessons that I've been drawing from software agents are also widely applicable to robotics and physical spaces as well. So thank you for your time.